In 2004, the first PlayStation 3 title was announced by Koei. Oh, I'm sorry, you thought you had to wait a long time for Final Fantasy 15? Well then, let me introduce you to Nioh. 13 years, 3 dev teams, and a big company merger later, and this game has finally come out. But how much does the current game resemble the one that was announced 13 years ago? Final Fantasy 15 and The Last Guardian finally got released within the past few months. Now, finally, another game that was announced long ago has seen the light of day. After about 13 years of development, Nioh has finally arrived. It's loosely based on the story of the first Western samurai, William Adams, an Englishman who traveled to Japan back in 1600. Landon has a Lost in Translation episode all about the guy that you should watch if you want to learn the history of the real William Adams. Cause I don't know if you can tell right now or not, but none of this ever actually happened. When Nioh was announced back in 2004, it was going to be a more traditional RPG. Then, after a few years, it came to resemble a Dynasty Warriors game, involving the effortless slaying of hordes and hordes of enemies. Now, it seems to be quite the opposite of that. It has become, essentially, a Dark Souls game set in feudal Japan. Nioh was originally based on a script written by the famed director Akira Kurosawa called Oni, which was never made into a movie. The game in its current form retains the original setting and the foreign-born main character, but little else from that initial concept. Building around the hype of finishing a story written by Japan's most famous director, a movie supplementing the game was in the works. It was even going to be directed by Akira Kurosawa's son. It would have cost around $30 million to make, but was cancelled in 2005 for unspecified reasons. Probably the challenges of actually finishing the game in the first place led to a focus on just that one aspect, as opposed to the complete media mix approach. The game missed its 2006 release date and seemed to be nowhere near completion even by 2008. It is here that things would take a pretty drastic turn that would completely derail the vision for Nioh. A Japanese company called Tecmo had been going through a rough patch. Their president, Yoshimi Yasuda, stepped down amid increasing costs and decreasing profits for the company. The next president, Kenji Matsubara, emphasized the need to scale up in order to survive. Tecmo didn't have the resources to accomplish this in a timely manner, so the company began seeking outside help. Seeing their predicament, Square Enix stepped in and offered to buy the company outright. Not exactly the kind of deal they were looking for, but one that would ensure their survival as a company for many years to come. Square Enix's acquisition proposal just didn't sit well with Matsubara-san, and he began searching elsewhere for a more equal partnership that would enable Tecmo to retain control over their properties. In steps Koei. Tecmo and Koei enjoyed a friendly relationship for years, so when Square Enix set a deadline on the offer, Tecmo turned to them in order to find an alternative option quickly. In only 2 days, an agreement had been made between the two companies and the merger was set in motion. It would take a few more years for everything to become official, but by the end of 2009, the two companies were legally bound. Kenji Matsubara commented on the good relationship of the Tecmo founding family and the Koei founding family that had made it possible to strike a deal in such a short amount of time. Nioh development was almost entirely scrapped in the merger, and its future was uncertain. Many of the higher-ups at Koei felt there weren't enough fun elements in the game. Development was transferred to internal Koei division Omega Force. JRPGs were going out, and action games were getting bigger and bigger. Omega Force is the team behind the well-known Dynasty Warriors franchise. They began to implement that type of gameplay into Nioh, sacrificing many of the game's narrative and RPG aspects that had previously been implemented. This changed the game's direction drastically, as it gave more focus to gameplay than story. Team Ninja from new partner Tecmo was brought on in 2010 to help with Omega Force's development of the game. They're a top team at Tecmo and lended their expertise to Nioh's devs. They didn't quite feel that a Dynasty Warriors type game fit the story being told. Team Ninja must have really believed in the concept because in 2012, after Ninja Gaiden 3 was released, and kinda tanked, honestly, they took full control over Nioh and began making it, once again, into a drastically different game. They didn't take it back to an RPG, however. Instead, they pulled their inspiration from a very different source. In 2011, a game came out by the name of Dark Souls. There had been a few games before it that popularized a more difficult playstyle, but Dark Souls really showed the industry how many millions of people were willing to pay for that type of game. Team Ninja took note. They began to experiment with Dark Souls gameplay and had an alpha build of Nioh by the end of 2012 based on that concept. It was well received, and Koei Tecmo officially gave Team Ninja the go-ahead to finish the game in that style. Nioh was finally on its way towards release. In 2015, Nioh was re-revealed to be a game that was still in development and was due out in 2016. After releasing a demo and getting feedback, however, the game was delayed once again to make a few changes based on that information. Thus, in February of 2017, Nioh, the first game ever announced for the PlayStation 3, was released on the PlayStation 4. It has received very high marks from almost every gaming publication. When a game undergoes this many changes, it's hard to say definitively that the game we see actually took 13 years to make. But certainly the concept had been alive and just refused to die. Only one game in history has spent more time than Nioh in development. I don't think people enjoyed it very much. It wasn't a very good game. The trend lately is that games are taking way too long to make, but hopefully we're finally passing the phase where game companies think they can turn out massive games in just a short period of time.